Welcome to Sermon Brainwave with me, Karoline Lewis.
And me, Matt Skinner.
And me, Rolf Jacobson.
These are the texts for the fourth Sunday of Easter, which falls on May 11, 2025. The first reading is Acts, or continuing through Acts chapter 9, verses 36 through 43, Psalm 23, Revelation 7, 9 through 17, and the gospel reading always on this Sunday is from John 10, 22 through 30. Happy Good Shepherd Sunday to those who celebrate.
Oh, I do.
Do you?
I celebrate Good Shepherd Sunday. By the way, when you said it's always from John 10, you mean?
What I mean is year A, it's John 10, 1 to 10. Year B, John 10, 11 to 18. Year C, John 10, 22 to 30.
And then there's those few verses, apparently.
That they left out in 19 to 21.
And they're sad.
They should be.
Yeah.
But this section has nothing to do with John 10, 1 to 18, narratively, except that connection is it has sheep in it. And this is Good Shepherd Sunday. So we have these verses.
So let's let her rip. We talked about sheep a little bit last week and what it means to be considered a sheep. What's going on here? How would our Good Shepherd Sunday celebrations be impoverished if John had not included these 9 verses? What do we learn about sheep and Jesus' commitment to us as our shepherd that we would not know elsewhere?
Well, I don't know if you would not know elsewhere. I mean, it does add to the image of Jesus as shepherd that we've already heard earlier in the chapter, 10, 11 to 18. But those verses are 10, 1 to 10, 18, or 10, 21, whatever. Those verses are Jesus' discourse on the healing of the man born blind. So it is directly an interpretation of that sign and what that healing means for the man born blind. And I think that's always a really key thing for John 10 is the way in which it is typically taken out of context or how really rarely it is connected to the healing of the man born blind. So it's not just this disembodied metaphor, right? But it's really a connection to this is what calling Jesus a shepherd looks like. This is what it means. What did it mean for the man born blind? This is what it means. So it contextualizes and it incarnates it in many respects. And that the man born blind is a sheep, one of Jesus' sheep.
Got it.
So anyway, all that is to say that here, I think you do have more language of what that means for knowing Jesus as shepherd, being a sheep, that my sheep hear my voice, which he's already said, I know them, they follow me, I give them eternal life, I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. No one will snatch them out of my hand. That's a new phrase. And that becomes important later on in the farewell discourse. But I think if there's a way in which you can build off of what John has already claimed, right, about Jesus as shepherd and what's being added here. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So then should we regard then verse 22 as suggesting, okay, some time has now passed. We're in a new setting.
Yeah.
And I would read it something like this. It was winter. At that time, the festival of the dedication took place in Jerusalem. That's what I would do. So what's the festival of the dedication?
Hanukkah. Ta-da-da.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, so it's in a completely different time period in winter. And as you said, it was winter.
It was winter. And so, by the way,
I'm trying to have something good to say because I can't stop laughing. But
so
anyway.
Here's what's really funny, okay, to me.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what psalm they would read at the festival of the dedication?
Not Psalm 23.
Psalm 30, which we had last week.
Oh, man.
Right? Because it says at the start of Psalm 23, a song for the dedication of the temple.
Mm-hmm.
So, Hanukkah, give us the Hanukkah story, one of you guys, briefly.
Aren't you supposed to give that?
Okay, sure. So the
I can do that, but you
Very
go
briefly,
ahead. I'm just trying to figure out
temple was defiled.
Yes.
And then miraculously, the oil was sustained. And so the temple was rededicated.
Mm-hmm.
And so then this...
2nd century BCE.
Yes, thank you. What year about?
Like 170-ish?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Give or take a few.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
What's a few years among friends?
Might have been 150. Yeah, I can't remember either. I should know that. I will look it up shortly on something they call the Google.
I want to say 167 for some reason. Yeah. 153 was the number of fish that they caught last week.
All right, so How does that set this up? Or is it not important? It's just, is it important narratively, do you think, Karoline?
Well, the fact that it is a reference to the temple is interesting, right? That the location is connected to the Feast of Dedication of the temple, and then how the temple functions in John. We've already had the temple incident back in chapter 2. And this is the only place that in the Gospel of John that someone asks if Jesus is the Messiah. So it has everything to do with interrogation of his identity. And what I think is really interesting is that Jesus' answer is not really yes or no or whatever. His answer is, I am the shepherd. And so to identify himself as the shepherd in the midst of really what is his true identity, and the shepherd is also then the very location of God is here, not in the temple. I think there's something going on there. So it is an interrogation of Jesus' identity, and I think it is significant that Jesus' response is, you would know if you were one of my sheep. You would know my identity if you were in relationship with me, and that's key. And so that identity is in relationship. Knowing who Jesus is comes in that relationship between Jesus and his sheep. Does that make sense?
It does. I don't know if I can connect this or not. Maybe I'm just adding on top of it, but you're building a scaffold for me. The protection that's so pronounced here seems important. I give them eternal life and they will never perish.
Mm-hmm.
No one will snatch them out of my hand. And to see that also in connection to the Hanukkah miracle, which is, the oil miraculously lasts so that the fighters, the Maccabees, might be able to survive. And you're talking about the Maccabean revolt as this incredibly violent period with a very clear villain in Antiochus Epiphanes. And so the idea of security seems really important, right? Nobody being able to snatch out of my hand of a God who provides seems important. Maybe I'm just looking for a Hanukkah connection.
Well, no, not only that, a God who provides, but a God who is present. That's also the significance of this particular interrogation between Jesus and the authorities, is whether or not in Jesus one recognizes that this is the presence of God. So it's not just what God can do, like provide, but that God is actually here, when one would question whether or not God could be here. And how is God revealing God's self? So that's why the location of the temple is so important. I mean, why I think this location of connecting it to the dedication of the temple is really adds many layers then to what Jesus is revealing about himself here, which, sometimes I think our preaching of Jesus as the Good Shepherd is pretty, how shall I say this? Lame.
Saccharine.
Yes.
Yeah.
So to put this in the context of that, the dedication of the temple and what Jesus has already said in chapter 10, and that Jesus will lay down his life. I mean, it adds a lot more than, just a little lamb on the top of Jesus' shoulders that we see in artwork. You know what I mean?
I do.
Yeah.
Since I brought up that whole difficult subject, I'll just remind people of what they already know, which is nothing about connecting that events of the rededication of the temple in 164 BCE, since I looked it up.
Thank you.
You did the Google?
I did. It was the problem is the rebellion lasted many years, and so this is sort of the year it ends, really, in a sense. But connecting it with that, we have to be careful not to be supersessionist.
Correct.
Like, this is the true meaning of it. Don't do any of that.
No, and in fact, in the wider context of John, this is what you see John doing, right? How much of Jesus' revelation of his identity is connected to knowing God in these major events of the lives of God's people. Passover in John 6, here, Feast of Dedication. So there's a way in which John is making that connection. You cannot know Jesus as God really outside of these, the ways in which God has already revealed God's self.
I agree with that totally. I think it's really important for me to put the emphasis in this on verse 27. My sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. that it's not just about our struggle to know God, but first about the promise that God knows us. God knows you. You are known by God. I think that's first, both grammatically and theologically, that's first.
I would then, how do you incorporate Psalm 23 into a sermon on this?
Seems a reasonable choice of a psalm for the day.
Yes. And so the way in which the psalmist gives language to that image of the Lord as shepherd.
How much time do we have? One of the really interesting things about the Bible is that in the New Testament period, shepherds are looked kind of down upon by society, if I have understood you guys correctly over the years.
It's been overblown.
Yeah.
They're not exactly the most influential people in the world, but there was a while where one person proposed that they were kind of the scum of the earth, and that's not the case.
But they're not exactly, it's not a metaphor for...
Any kind of like manual labor is kind of looked down on in the Roman world for the most part.
In the Old Testament and the entire Old Testament back period, the ancient Near East, shepherd is a metaphor for the king. You guys have heard me talk about this for, 17 years. And so you get the weird thing. On the one hand, it might be that, I think that certainly in John 10, it's picking up on that, the positive aspect of the shepherd metaphor. And that you see it throughout the art of the ancient Near East, that kings are portrayed as shepherds. And so when Psalm 1 says, the Lord is my shepherd, it's a royal metaphor. God is my king. Matt, you're going to like that. You're Presbyterian. You like that king theology, right?
Yeah, we love it. Yeah, especially keep it gendered like that and everything. Yeah, we can't get enough of that kind of
stuff. Exactly.
There's more power.
Again, I could talk forever about this. Here's what I would maybe pick up this time. I really resonate with the second half of the psalm, that you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and that you anoint my head with oil and my cup overflows. That the imagery here of is abundance and the provision that the shepherd has for guests and for the flock, so that one's cup overflows. And that's a great metaphor for abundance in God's love. And as people have heard before, verse 6, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me is a lame translation because the verb follow is pursue in Hebrew. And elsewhere in the Psalms, enemies are the ones that pursue. But God's qualities of goodness and mercy are personified. So it's not God who pursues, but God's these values or these rather qualities of goodness and mercy, which shouldn't be translated probably goodness and mercy. I am just triple checking. But tov is goodness, but then the word mercy is chesed, God's steadfast love, or as I like to translate it, faithful love. That God's very nature will not let us stray from God. Like I said, lambs, I think I said this last week, lambs stray, lambs get lost, and God's steadfast love, God's most important value, chesed, is personified as pursuing, the one who seeks us out and finds us all the days of my life. For more, just listen to past year's Fourth Sunday of Easter podcast. And Karoline and I will talk about the Good Shepherd in Psalm 23 till you cannot listen anymore. But Acts. We've been in Acts 9.
We are in Acts 9.
Love Acts 9.
Tabitha, Dorcas.
Yeah. What do you think?
Great names.
They are. Gazelle.
Gazelle means gazelle.
Yeah.
Which one? Dorcas or Tabitha?
Dorcas.
Both.
Oh, see?
Tabitha in Aramaic, Dorcas in Greek, both being gazelle.
I forgot that. I must have known it once.
We were speaking of sartorial decisions a couple weeks ago,
and
then you said, we're going to talk about sartorial elements in a couple weeks.
We are. Among other things, Tabitha is a clothing maker, which I think is a really important detail.
Why?
Well, how often do we get details about the lives of people who are healed in the Gospels or Acts? They usually come across more as objects than as subjects. Here's somebody who's a member of a community, perhaps a leader within a community, especially among the widows, who puts clothing on them, which is a basic human need, which I believe Rolf in years past has talked about how much time was dedicated
I was just about to do that,
the making, washing, and repair of clothing. It's just serious work in the ancient world where you had maybe one or two things to wear until it wore out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think too, it's such a beautiful scene where they show Peter her tangible contributions to this community. But clothing too, to make somebody clothes, you've got to know something about their bodies. You've got to care for them. You know what I mean? There's a sense of knowing. I hope she's not making one-size-fits-all tunics and just throwing them on a rack. But I think there's something about just the closeness, the way in which the service she offers as a disciple, I think also as a leader in this community, is deeply personal, face-to-face.
Can I talk about clothing for a minute?
Absolutely.
So in our society, especially in North America, clothing is this mass manufactured thing.
Fast fashion.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Or you can go into a store, if you have money, and buy any piece of clothing. And like you said, we have racks. Or if you go to a men's store and you want to buy a suit coat, we've got different sizes. I mean, so the sizes aren't just small, medium, large. It's 38, 40, 42, 44.
You also have different colors of suit coats.
Yes.
That's correct. I do.
But,
Happy Easter.
It's democratized that people can wear anything. It really wasn't that way. And I think most clothing that people had would have actually been made for them. Have you ever had a piece of clothing tailored for you?
My mother made all my clothes.
Wow, that's
well,
pretty
not
cool.
all my clothes, but she made, especially as preachers' kids, and I had two younger sisters, she would make matching dresses for us for Easter and Christmas.
That's so cool.
And we had one pattern, and then she used the same material and made herself a dress in a different pattern with the same material. And then my dad, like a leisure shirt in the same material. My favorite was one for Easter. It was it had pears and peaches on it. I don't know how often my dad wore that shirt.
I love it.
Yes, my mother made a lot of my clothes.
Yeah, but there's something something so intimate about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really calls forth, like you said, something about who this person is. And that, like you said, this beautiful scene where they took him weeping and showing tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made. This is part of the grieving for that. And then, right, that Peter is able to raise her, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is my text at the Festival of Homiletics.
Nice.
A week from now.
Okay.
I'm not going to give away the whole thing.
I shall look forward to it. I shall look forward to it greatly.
Well, there's something, in hearing this in Resurrection, right, or hearing this during the Easter season, for me, like we've already talked about, I hear it as it's so personal and it's so intimate that the possibility of new life is surrounded by this kind of attention and care, and they take care of her body, and then the emphasis on the body, and then he gave her his hand and helped her up. I think there's something you could do homiletically with what might resurrection feel like? What might resurrection look like? Is it going to be you Lazarus walking out of the tomb, or is it going to look like this? Not that we can ever know. Or could that be something that is a really powerfully comforting for people to think that if they've lost someone, that this is the kind of care that resurrection promises? I don't know. That's something that I find really, really touching.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes people get stuck on verse 42 and they say, oh, this is done so that everybody might believe in the Lord. It's part of it. I wish that the author had also said this became known throughout Joppa and the widows continued to be well cared for or something like that, and you've got to parse what it meant to be a widow in the ancient world. You've got to parse out the fact that not all widows were destitute. But last thing I'll say is the fact that she's got two names is really interesting, which might suggest that she is herself multilingual, that she might be a kind of glue between Aramaic-speaking and Greek-speaking Jews in this Christian community, which there were problems in Acts 6 between Hellenists and Hebrews, and just a bit of a hint, right, that people know her by a variety of names, and perhaps she circulates among different kinds of people in a particular way. In other words, the promise of Pentecost is still being lived out, right, of diverse people who are brought together in the Spirit.
And because I'm a capitalist, she's a businesswoman. She's a tailor. She's making cool stuff, make people feel good. And I'll just add, and then he has to go stay with a tanner. They noticed that, you know what a tanner was?
I do, because that's where the Skinners would hand off our
Oh, yeah.
our work to the tanners.
Yeah.
What?
Yes.
You think those leather boots just make themselves?
In the Sermon Brainwave Galactic Headquarters, for those of you who are just listening, Karoline just cringed when he said Skinner to Tanner. And tanners were smelly.
And then called me out on my new boots.
President Grant's father was a tanner, which is why he went to West Point, because he didn't want to be a tanner.
Oh.
It was hard, smelly work. So that doesn't have a whole lot to do, but there is a contrast there. The beautiful, caring, lovely, tanners.
Yeah, true.
Love that. That's for you, my friend Beth Tanner. All right. Revelation 7.
Skinners and tanners go way back. We're tight.
I wasn't going to say anything about that because I'm more of a Miller kind of guy. So let's go to Revelation 7.
The great multitude.
Yeah. And then the great question is, who are these people? And then in verse 13, we're told these are people who have come out of the great ordeal.
The great ordeal.
Which we're not fully clued in. Is this something that's already happened, or is this something that the author of Revelation thinks is about to happen? Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, it's pretty serious in terms of kind of this view of martyrs.
Mm-hmm. But they're also,
And what are they?
What?
They're washed in the blood of the Lamb, which is a song that my band sings all the time. If you don't know it, Are You Washed in the Blood of the Lamb? It's a great old gospel tune, which of course, and this whole thing metaphorically makes no sense. Look at this. Listen to this. These are those who have come out of the great ordeal. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood. Okay, if you wash a robe in blood, it's not going to be white.
Yeah.
But of course, by the way, this is an ancient culture. The people in this culture are not white. I just want to point that out. So this is their metaphor for what they are talking about. And it's a crazy metaphor for being purified. But as you said, it's purified both through persecution and then rescue. Mm-hmm. How would you put that?
You threw me with the rescue.
Well,
yeah.
I think it's the idea that a martyr doesn't die in vain, that the martyrs are.
Yeah.
And there is a promise that they'll be vindicated.
Yes, vindication is better than rescue. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it depends on, obviously, what a preacher is doing. If they're walking through the Revelation text for Easter. Since this is the fourth Sunday of Easter, Good Shepherd Sunday, for the,
Verse 17.
What? Verse 17,
yeah.
Right? The center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of the water of life, which, takes you back to Psalm 23 and the abundance of John 10:10. But then also God will wipe away at every tear from their eyes, right? And so that adds another layer of this image of shepherd as this comforter, this one who is present in those tears and takes that away. And so that, again, like another perspective or another feature, characteristic of the shepherd with which people might resonate. Sermon Brainwave is a production of Luther Seminary's Working Preacher. Working Preacher has been a trusted source of inspiration, interpretation, and imagination for preachers worldwide since 2007. Find episodes and links at workingpreacher.org/brainwave, and be sure to rate, subscribe, and comment on YouTube. Thanks for joining us.